Welcome to Your Voice, Your Future, a town hall meeting on domestic violence. I'm Tim McGinnis. The numbers are not good. More than 36,000 victims report a domestic incident to law enforcement every year in South Carolina. Over the past 13 years, an average of 33 women a year have been killed by their intimate partner. In fact, according to the Domestic Policy Center, South Carolina ranks first in the nation for women killed by men. Finally, there's this statistic. Domestic violence is the leading cause of injuries to women ages 15 to 44, more common than car accidents, muggings, or even cancer combined. So how do we put an end to domestic violence? Here's tonight's moderator, CW21 owner Armstrong Williams.
Hello, everyone. I'm Armstrong Williams, your moderator for tonight's very important topic on domestic violence. It is long overdue. I don't know anybody, not only in South Carolina, but also in this country, who has not been impacted by domestic violence. You know, I could not even imagine growing up in a household where my father beat my mother. And just for those men and women who were like my parents, I want to give such respect and honor to those, because when I grew up, I never ever witnessed my father laying a hand on my mother. And I know that's the story of many other men and women in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the story of every household. And to really put this story in perspective, before we introduce our very distinguished panel, very distinguished, I want you to hear this story from a bishop, Bishop Goings, who's a very powerful and well-known bishop in Marion County. We happened to interview him earlier today, and he told this remarkable story in the studio, and I would like for Bishop Goings to tell his story. Bishop Goings, please stand. Yes. Tell your story.
Thank you, Armstrong. Well, my earliest collection of domestic violence goes back as far as I can remember. Perhaps when I was about 3 to 4 years of age, I can remember my father beating my mother, literally beating my mother. And several times she was beaten to a pulp, and several times she had to go to the hospital and beaten unconscious. And the culmination of this long beating, this history of beating in my family, and it was amazing. I had 9 brothers, but none of us would lay hands on him because of my mother. And but it was when I was in my early 20s. The last incident was when my father came home from a trip and was enraged and upset and was attempting to hurt my mother. He picked up a brick hammer, and she got in her car and tried to drive away, but he ran out and took the hammer, knocked her driver's side glass off. And I remember something got a hold of me, and I picked up a leveler, a metal leveler, and jumped on the hood of the car and started hitting my father to protect my mother. That ended the episode of the domestic violence. And many times I was at home when I was coming up afraid, and I would hear him fussing, arguing, and almost always he would be drunk. Alcohol and promiscuity, you know, he's dead and gone, and he amended for his ways, and I became his pastor. He gave his life to the Lord. But the scar and the hurt of that abuse was very much with us. But it's amazing that none of my brothers are abusive to their wives. I can attribute that maybe to the determination within us not to follow in the pattern of the footsteps of our father, and of course prayer. But it was real to me. Domestic violence was a vital part of my life, and I escaped it, and I deal with it now as a pastor in counseling and advising women. Don't take it.
Oh, what a story. You know, that story needs no other story except the introduction of our panel to talk about what he discussed. Some people would have expected that we would have the actual victim, the mother, the daughter, to talk about it, but it impacts men too in a very devastating way. Let me introduce our very distinguished panel. Attorney General Alan Wilson, thank you so much for joining us. Attorney General of this great state of South Carolina. Laura Slade Hudson, the Executive Director of these crime victims. Thank you so much for joining us. And your very own, our very distinguished Chief of Police for Horry County, Chief Sandra Rose. Yes. and Nina East, who is a senior editor and columnist for Fortune magazine. We're so glad to have the media and their perspective here. You know, let us start with you, Chief Rose. When you hear this story and the story of domestic violence, obviously it's more common than uncommon.
To calls for criminal domestic violence daily here in Horry County.
And what is it like for you when you actually hear these calls? And I know sometimes you've said in the past that you've gone out for yourself. What is that like for you?
It's difficult because of the victims, the types of victims. You just heard the bishop speak, but we know that it's not just a woman that's impacted or the spouse that's impacted by criminal domestic violence. It's the entire family. And it's difficult for police officers to have to respond. I mean, we put people in jail every day for criminal domestic violence, but the follow-up is just as important to us, and providing services to those victims, just as important. But it most certainly is a difficult crime, and it's one of our largest call volume types, one of our largest types of crime, with the largest call volume.
Ms. Hudson, you know, you spent so much of your life fighting this issue, speaking out about it, comforting victims, and also seeing signs of it in people that were unwilling to admit it. Where have we made progress, and where is it that we need to work harder?
Well, I deal mostly with the General Assembly and with public policy, and over the years we've tried to improve our laws. We've tried to have the types of penalties that we needed. We've tried to give comfort to crime victims. But, you know, we have many of our shelters in our state, but we need more. And more importantly, we need a sustainable financial help on those particular shelters. Right now, they're on grants, they're on, you know, people giving them money and giving them things, but we really don't have a really sustainable source of money to help those shelters improve. And that's something that I want to look at in the future, as some of our grants are drying up. And some of the, you know, because of our economy, there's not as much giving going to the nonprofits, and that's an area that we need to really look at. But as far as our laws are good, but in my opinion, our weaknesses are in our magistrate and court systems that are not giving it the kind of attention that we need. And criminal domestic violence is a community problem, and it has to have a community collaborative answer. We need men, we need women, we need families that are going to support women and know that this is an important area to go in.
Mr. Attorney General, I'm going to make it a little uncomfortable for you. I wouldn't be myself if I didn't do that. You know, you're highly respected. You're really an officer of the law. You are the Attorney General. You know, what shocks me is the number of law enforcement officials that are involved with domestic violence. And it's a very high number, which sometimes they don't want to talk about. They sweep it under the rug. I see Chief Rose's reaction. But you know what? We want to bring it all home tonight. I mean, law enforcement officers are the example. But yet, are you sending a law enforcement officer out to stop a domestic violence, and they're doing the same thing at home? How do you expect them to be sensitive to that?
Well, first off, we've got to quit stereotyping our victims and our defendants. Our defendants can be the guys in white hats at times. I once prosecuted a man for raping his granddaughter, and he was a police officer. So first we got to get away from just because you're a cop or you're in law enforcement or you're a prosecutor, you're not capable of doing that kind of activity. And the same with the victims. Victims can be lower income, they can be upper income, low education, high education. Let's just throw the stereotypes out. Anybody can be the bad guy and anybody can be the victim when it comes to domestic violence. When it comes to law enforcement, we have got, and I've talked to the chief tonight, and I know that she's probably a model and a paradigm for law enforcement around the state when it comes to training your law enforcement officers on how to react to when they observe domestic violence. But you've also got to train, educate, and counsel your officers because they see violence all the time. And that's going to have an effect. Just like the bishop said in his story, that left an indelible mark on him and to this day. And unfortunately, it's not a unique scenario. That happens to lots of people. It happens to law enforcement too, not just pastors. So we have got to offer counseling to those people who are seeing the violence in the trenches every single day, and they're not robots. They're human beings just like we are. And we've got to minister and counsel to their needs and give them the resources to deal with their problems so that they can go out there and minister to the community's problems.
I know you want to say something. Go ahead, Chief Rose.
Yeah, I have to address this.
Yes, I know you.
I will tell you that because of the stressful situations that our officers do view, and there is no excuse for any type of criminal domestic violence, I think for some of those cases that you spoke of, with them being law enforcement, a lot of police officers don't seek some type of mental health counseling for themselves. You can't see ugly every single day and not find a release for it. And what we find is typically people who are victimized the most are people who are closest to the individual, family members. And so he comes home or she comes home stressful, when you're speaking of the law enforcement officer, and they take that release out, they relieve their stress through violence. And so I think that the answer to that is obviously prosecute anyone who is involved in criminal domestic violence. It doesn't matter whether it's a police officer or not. But I do know that spouses of police officers don't want to call the police simply because they are afraid that the fellow officers will cover up for police officers. And I want them to realize that's not the case. That's not the case at all. We are probably hardest on ourselves because if we have a fellow officer that is violating the law in any way, shape, or form, but obviously criminal domestic violence is not something that we would ever accept. We police our own when it comes to that. So we want people to call and understand that that's not acceptable for law enforcement at all.
You know, Nina, you're a senior editor and columnist for Fortune magazine. You know, given the rise of women in this country and where they are and what they represent, it would seem that there would be much more media attention and much more attention to this issue. And it's one thing to say that law enforcement are men sweeping on the rug, but women tend to want to keep it hush-hush, don't want to talk about it. Why?
It's one of those issues that I think is difficult because it's a crime, but it's complicated. We know that women return to abusive partners time and again. You see this. Yes. They return because of an emotional connection. They return because they may have an economic need. This is their sole source of income. They return because this is the father of their children. They return because they're scared of leaving. Because as we know, men become more dangerous when a woman's about to leave. My view of this is that, I'm very involved through Fortune, and we have a Fortune Women's Summit. I'm very involved in economic empowerment of women, young women in the developing world, where we see a lot of domestic abuse. What happens, though, in those communities, in those villages, when girls get educated and when women get into the workforce, the violence starts to subside. I have a firm belief that this is not just a law enforcement issue, that women who are being abused need an escape hatch. And if they don't have education, and if they don't have a job to go to, and if they don't have housing, that's not just a shelter, but is longer-term housing, then they're going to be more trapped and more isolated, and it's going to be harder for them to get out of that situation. And they don't see, and I think a lot of these women are very isolated, and they're not even exposed to a different life, and they can't see past the life that they're in. So I think that has to be part of the solution.
Let's go to Tim McGinnis, anchor for WPDE and CW21, and see what's going on with the social media desk and see how you can participate through social media in this live conversation tonight. Tim?
Thanks a lot, Armstrong. You can go to Facebook. We are News Channel 15 on Facebook. We are at Carolina Live on Twitter. Make a comment about what you're hearing here. Ask a question to the panel. I'm going to share part of a comment that somebody made on our Facebook page, and let's see how the panel reacts. Tim St. John says, in part, I have no clue as to why some women chose bad and hurtful attention over no attention at all. You always have an option. Just pack up and leave if you can't get the expletive thrown in jail. I think Nina was just talking to that. Armstrong?
Thank you, Tim, and we will continue to have those updates with Tim McGinnis. You just spoke to something, Tim, about why don't you leave? Well, Lisa is one of those people you're talking about. She was trapped in a domestic violent relationship, and I'm not going to tell her story. Let her tell it. She tells it best. Lisa?
Thank you, Armstrong.
Thank you.
I met my abuser in 2000. We dated, and I just fell head over heels in love. He was very charismatic, and I had a need for someone to love me. I had very little self-esteem, and I just fell right into it. I thought he was just the man of my dreams. In less than a year, things changed dramatically. He was very controlling. He was very jealous. I had a lot of friends that came around. We did things together. He made them feel very uncomfortable. They slowly dropped off. His whole point was to isolate me, to get me away from friends and family so he could have more control. The thing about it, it happened so gradually that I didn't really realize. At first, I thought it just meant he loved me because he wanted to spend all that time with me. But now I see that he was grooming me and getting me to the point that he wanted me at. At first, it was a lot of verbal abuse, and then it became more physical. I've been beaten many, many times. Sometimes I would look in the mirror and I didn't even know who I was anymore. I really lost the ability to think for myself and make decisions. You know, he controlled everything. When he moved in, it was my place to live, a home that I was purchasing. I had my own car. I had a good job. Before I knew it, he controlled the whole house. He was driving my car, and I was looking for a way to get around. It was just it's the most traumatic thing I've ever been through in my life. It ended in July of 2006. It was a really bad beating. He shattered my ankle, and I had a blood clot in my lung. I had lost my mother to a blood clot in her lung, so when I found out, you know, that was the problem, I just thought to myself, he's killed me. I just haven't died yet. And, you know, I didn't know that you could survive a blood clot in your lung, so I thought, you know, that was the end of me. Luckily, while I was in the hospital, I found out about a place that I could go to get help. I never knew a shelter existed. I never knew there was somewhere you could go to get help. So by the grace of God, I did go, and I started to learn what had been done to me and what I needed to do to move forward in my life. And I'm so thankful that that shelter was there and I was able to get the help that I needed to move forward.
Thank you. So, Mr. Attorney General, when you hear that story, I think Nina makes a very interesting point, and there's so much to this that we cannot even think through until we get all the ideas of people who've experienced this. I mean, we talk about you getting beat, we're talking about you being harmed. It's more than just physical, it's verbal, it's mental. But where do you go? Where do you go? Well, what do you do?
Well, Nina said it very articulately just a moment ago. There are various reasons why women don't leave. And the gentleman on Facebook made the comment about they have options. Well, that's not always the case. A lot of times a woman may be with a man, she may have no education, she may have no job, no marketable skills because she's always been in that relationship since she was in the 10th grade. And there are a number of reasons why a woman won't leave. Might be for the health and safety of her children. Maybe the man has threatened the lives of her children. So it's not like she just wants to be in a bad relationship. There are other reasons that keep people locked in. One other point, domestic violence I've often found is not about the violence. It's about the batterer controlling someone. It's about control. She said it just a moment ago. If it was about violence and exerting power, the batterer would punch everybody they had conflict with everywhere. They're walking through the supermarket. They didn't like something you said, they'd punch you in the face. They only beat the person in their household because it's about controlling them. When that person doesn't conform to what the batterer wants, the batterer beats them. So it's a control issue. Where do these people go? We have 25 to 30 shelters in the state. Every county has access to a shelter. We have educational resources, both in law enforcement, both in victims advocacy groups, as well as the shelters. Churches, frankly, I think churches could be a great source of information if we could just get the information to them and get the churches motivated. A lot of churches out there are already doing it, but we could have a lot more churches involved. I've actually had a pastor one time told me that he believed it was taught in the Bible that the woman should not leave the man until he kills her That's her exit strategy, is being killed. I was actually told that by a pastor.
Crazy.
And it was a couple of years ago, and it shocked me. Yes, we don't want to see marriages break up, but more importantly, we want to have children and people in healthy relationships so you don't perpetuate this cycle of violence where you said yourself a minute ago, you could never dream of your father laying a hand on your mother. There are young men out there that can't dream on their father not laying a hand on their mother because it's all they know. And when they grow up and become daddies, it's what they know and it's what they do. That is no excuse. No one's excusing it, but that is a reason.
Chief Rose, and somebody in this audience, you must help us with this, okay, because we're coming to you. There is no way, for me, help me out, because I have much to learn on this subject too. There's just no way you can date someone for so long and before marrying them, there are not some signs there. There's gotta be some signs that this person is capable of this kind of behavior. I refuse to believe that there's not something you did not see in this man when you were dating him. And you have, but you ignored it. Yes, I know. What is it, Chief Rose, that they ignore and they refuse to accept?
Really, there's a cycle of violence when it comes to criminal domestic violence. There's a cycle that follows. One thing that she did not mention was the honeymoon phase, because I'm sure that there was a honeymoon phase where there was apologies, where there were flowers, where there were dinners. And it's a cycle, and so he beats you, he apologizes, you go through that honeymoon phase where we're all in love again, and he promises to never do this again. When I listened to her, I was sitting there thinking, I've heard that story, I know at least 300 times, that exact same story that she just told. That's the way that it is, and yes, there are red flags, there are signs, but we need to educate our young women, and improve their self-esteem. She just said that she had very low self-esteem. Men, abusers, recognize that. He recognized that. He chose you because he knew that someone with high self-esteem, very unlikely to accept that type of behavior. He knew, he took you through the entire cycle. He isolated you. He made you feel that no one would ever care about you but him, and nobody could because you weren't worth caring about. He took you through that entire cycle. So Armstrong, that's what it is. It's a cycle, and it's one that we have to break, and educating our people is the only way that we're going to be able to break that cycle.
Can I ask Lisa?
Oh, sure. Logan.
You and I were speaking before, and you said after this happened, you went back to school. Were you, when you were in this abusive relationship, what was your education level, and what kind of a job were you in, if any?
At that time, I had completed the 9th grade, and I was a house painter. I did go on to go back to school. I graduated from Moore Georgetown Tech, and I am now the coordinator of a domestic violence shelter.
Let us go back to our social media desk, and if anybody, and I know you're feeling it, ready to ask a question, just right here. And we'll get to you, okay? Don't be shy. This is not a place to be shy. If you're shy, you're in the wrong place. Let's go back to Mr. McGinnis at the social media desk and let him update us on the latest.
Thanks, Armstrong. Again, you can tweet us at Carolina Live. You can also get to us on Facebook. We are News Channel 15 on Facebook, but we got something in through one of our social media platforms, and I don't want to share the woman's name, but I want to share her message to us, and maybe if she's watching tonight, some people on our panel can give her some advice. She says, I've been in an abusive relationship for 11 and a half years. I've been hit in the head with a gun. She's in this relationship. If somebody's watching right now, what should they be doing? Armstrong?
Who would like to answer that? Mr. Attorney General, what should she be doing?
The first thing that a person in that situation should do is remove themselves from that situation as fast as they possibly can. Physically remove yourself. Emotional, it takes time.
She doesn't even know what that means after 11 years.
Well, you're right. But not being in the house with that individual is the first thing. The resources that we've talked about, that the chief talked about, are the shelters, the halfway houses, a neighbor's house, a friend's house. Surely they have a friend. That's what the batterers do. They call you out. They separate you from your friends and family. You've got to reconnect. If you know that you're being taken away from people, you've got to reconnect with the world, and you have to have an exit strategy. Surely there has to be a friend. you have to notify somebody in the world that you're in the situation, and you have to remove yourself from it as fast as possible.
Laura?
There are telephone numbers that are out there. There are all kinds of information. We've put information on the back of the doors in restrooms. Call these numbers. Take the little ticket that's there in South Carolina. You can do that, where he doesn't see where you got that information. Make that call. Send out a lifeline. But I am very concerned about the mood tonight of blaming the victim, that she needs to do this and she needs to do that. And it really should be more about what we're doing about the offender. What are we holding him responsible? This is just unacceptable types of behavior. We hear from individuals that we think are in the lower economic area, but I call the silk shirt crowd. They're getting that same kind of behavior, and we need to have more and more resources in our state, and that's the only answer I can come up with, is we have to have those resources. We have to have people able to reach out, but we have to hold the offender responsible for what he or she is doing.
Tim, we have to help that lady that's on social media. You got to find out where she is. We got to find out the nearest shelter location. She doesn't have to give her all the information. Because listen, this is what this is about tonight. This woman should not go to sleep tonight in that house, and we know we can help her. We need to find out the location, we need to be proactive, and we need to tell her where she can go so she can get out of that situation.
Let Ms. Kennedy speak.
Yes, Ms. Kennedy. Logan. Yes, please.
It's a
Stand.
24-hour
Stand, please. Please.
Thank you for what you're doing tonight. There's a 24-hour free and confidential hotline in your hands.
Turn this camera right here.
There's a 24-hour free and confidential hotline number in your hand. Please publish that on your program today so that anyone watching this who needs that help can get it immediately.
Now,
thank you.
Now, Beverly Kennedy is co-executive director of the Justice Center here in Georgetown, South Carolina. So let's get that information, because we have got to help her, okay? Is there anybody? Yes. You've got to come around. I want to go back to you, Chief Rose, while I'm waiting on Benny to come around. And that is, I guess when it hits you to leave, I mean, that has to be like shocking for that person. You got to leave everything that you work hard for, your house, your family, all your belongings, to get out of there. How do you help them forget about the materialism, forget about the attachment, and say it is just time to go, leave it all behind?
We do try to tell them that it doesn't necessarily have to be temporary. He is the person that's violating the law.
Right.
And so she doesn't have to, she doesn't have to leave all of her belongings in her life forever. The best thing to let her know, this is a temporary situation, but we're trying to save your life. It's what it boils down to. But for the woman on social media, let me address that I know we gave out the number for the shelter, but in reality, if she is afraid to walk out that door, she can call the police. She can come. We have 4 precincts throughout this county. She can come to any precinct, and any officer would escort her back to get enough belongings to make it through the night. And we'll deal with tomorrow. Let's get you out of there tonight. So she can call the police. She doesn't have to go to the shelter alone. We will escort her to that shelter. So please call for us. Call the police. Dial 911, call the non-emergency number, but call the police, and we will provide her with the resources and the information that she needs to get the help that she needs.
Nina?
I was just going to jump in here. One thing that frightened me especially about that was that he had beat her with a gun.
Right.
48 women died, wasn't it, in 2012 in South Carolina at the hands of men? Wasn't it mostly by guns?
And 52% of them were with weapons. With guns.
And I think an easy accessibility to a gun in a home is something a woman in that situation should be careful of and worry about.
Definitely.
Mr. Attorney General?
Well, I was going to say, a person who is capable of shoving you is capable of punching you with their fist. A person who is capable of punching you with their fist is capable of hitting you with a blunt object. A person who is capable of hitting you with a blunt object is capable of stabbing or shooting you. People seem to think that there's a large spectrum between a shove or abusive language and being shot. Being hit with a gun's one thing. That guy that hits you with the butt of a gun will shoot you with that gun. And I want to say this. I do agree with what Laura said. we don't want to put the we don't want to put it on the victims that it's somehow their fault.
Right.
But and the chief was better at saying this than I was. When I say remove yourself from the situation, I'm not saying remove yourself from the situation forever. Remove yourself from the situation immediately and get to a resource. But we have got to remove those people from that bad situation, and we have got to give them a hope, because a lot of them don't have hope, and there's a lot of hopelessness out there, and we've got to address that.
Benny?
Armstrong, before Benny speaks,
Okay.
I want to address the shove issue. I have heard that from so many victims.
Right.
Well, he didn't hit me, he just pushed me. And what I really want our victims to understand, it is only going to escalate from there. So the push is going to become the punch. The punch is going to become the choke. The choke is going to become, I'm hitting you with something besides my fist now.
You know, whatever
and it's
it takes
going
to
whatever
control
it
you.
takes to control you. So it's only going to escalate. And the promises are eventually going to go away. The honeymoon phase is going to go away. It's going to get to a point where they're not even apologizing anymore.
You know, we're putting the telephone number for that person and anybody else who's finding the courage through this show, through this town hall meeting, to call in to save yourself from the situation. Just look at the lower third of our cameras. It's there. Call. And I think Chief Rose said it best. There's law enforcement that's willing to come and escort you out of that situation. And I'll tell you one thing. They will not they will not be intimidated, law enforcement, by whatever man is in that house, okay? Because when they come with heat, pack it, okay? And that's not a bad thing, especially for law enforcement, that is. Benny.
Thank you very much, and want to just appreciate everything you're doing in regards to subject matter. But I think that, again, one of the points that were made is we must not blame the victim. We must not blame the victim.
You're right.
Far too many times, and you talked about the silk shirt crowd, the T-shirt crowd of poverty, when they don't have any control over their own lives, they always want to control somebody else. And that control lends itself to abuse. Too many times we find women in need of services not being able to access those services. So I would hope that we'd find a way to put up additional monies to ensure that we have the shelters, have the support so they can grow and educate themselves. Because in far too many cases, education is absent, jobs are absent, low self-esteem, so they just feel like they're in a no-win situation. Let's provide the support and the services that these women so desperately need.
Thank
It's a
you.
community problem. And thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank
I
you.
would. I don't think anybody's
Logan.
blaming the victim when we say that women need an escape hatch. I think, you know, the Violence Against Women Act at the national level was passed in 1994, and it took the step of getting law enforcement to understand and take this seriously, and that was huge. But there's been reauthorizations of the Violence Against Women Act in Congress in Washington. And one of the issues that comes up time and again is it's not just a law enforcement issue, that you have to provide a support for women beyond that. And, you know, counseling for the abuser, something beyond. It can't just, yes, law enforcement needs to be tough, but there needs to be other things that go along with that.
Well, we also have to look at our courts.
Yeah.
You know, and I personally see that to be our biggest weakness in this state, is our courts not responding properly. I cannot tell you how many judges that I have heard say, what did you do to the victim that made him hit you?
Still?
Yes.
Still.
Yeah.
You know, what have you done?
To
Or,
provoke
you know,
them.
that was just a little pot throwing back and forth. There's nothing here. Criminal domestic violence is one of those unique crimes that we have the opportunity to see escalation, but because we have CDV1, CDV2, CDV3, then we have, in kind of ABHAN, and it goes on up. We have an opportunity to look at that, but many of our courts are ignoring that. And one of the things we did several years ago is require education for our judges. Then we started doing dedicated courts around our state, which have been very, very successful, where you have a court that is the same judge. He is educated on the dynamics of criminal domestic violence. He is able to bring a victim advocate in. He's able to bring psychologists in. He's able to bring in people to give support about alcohol and drug abuse. and, you know, get help for the victim so that all of it is around that court and that judge can hold that person responsible. We have also this habit of putting, you know, criminal domestic violence into PTI, which is a pretrial intervention, which covers up the first one, and then he comes in again and it's another first, and he goes through that, and then it's another first. So we're kind of undermining, you know, our law sometimes with our court habits. So those are things that we've got to look at as a system, not just at law enforcement, not just at the courts, not just at the victim, not just at the offender, but how do we look at that entire system? And we need a statewide approach. One of the things I'm very excited about that the Attorney General is doing is this summer we're getting stakeholders together all over our state, that, you know, the courts, people who are giving, you know, victim services, law enforcement, community leaders, and yes, faith leaders, because I've been very disappointed in some of our, you know, faith leaders for not stepping up, and I'm so proud of you for doing that, and getting us all together and coming up with a state plan and applying for some federal money to try to go at it from the standpoint of the state, coming up with a lethality assessment program that other states have done, where we can pinpoint how that incident in a particular home is escalating. And I also want to say, it's the most dangerous thing you do.
Yes.
A law enforcement officer, 40% of their calls are about criminal domestic violence, but they put themselves at tremendous risk, and we've had many of our law enforcement officers have their lives taken because they've gone into a situation like that. So, you know, we have to look at this, you know, as a system, and I applaud our Attorney General for his leadership in that area.
Let's go back to, of course, we're not going to deny you, Mr. Attorney General. You have something to say.
Thank you, Armstrong. Nina said it earlier, and I wanted to make sure this audience and the viewers out there listening to this know this, that when you hear us, it sounds like we're giving an excuse. There are no excuses. And if we're giving an explanation, we're certainly never going to put the blame on the victim. But everything that has come out of my mouth tonight about what a victim should or should not do, I have gotten from actual victims. And so I've never been beat in a domestic situation, but I have prosecuted a lot of cases involving victims, and these are what the victims told me that they did. So I'm kind of channeling the voices from those past victims. Another thing that I've had to do recently, and I think it's important to note, we're not just fighting the batterers, and we're not fighting the bureaucracy, the ignorance out there. We're actually fighting our own court system. Several months ago, this is a landmark Supreme Court case. This is the most important case none of you have ever heard about. I had 2 cases in the Midlands being prosecuted, criminal domestic violence cases in magistrate court, municipal court. The defense attorney made motions that because these cases were in summary court, magistrate or municipal level, and not in general sessions court, that the Attorney General did not have the authority to prosecute them. Because I am the chief prosecutor in all courts of record. Okay? Magistrate and municipal courts aren't courts of record. They're courts where there's a tape recording, not someone transcribing. So we had to quit prosecuting those cases for 2 months while we asked the Supreme Court to hear this in the original jurisdiction and tell the world what we have already known for 300 years. That's how long there's been an AG here. That we are the chief prosecutor, and me or anyone working for me can prosecute at any level, record or summary court or not. The Supreme Court, thank goodness, unanimously sided with the Attorney General's office and said, yes, you can prosecute criminal domestic violence cases in municipal court. But we had to quit prosecuting them in that jurisdiction for 2 to 3 months in order to get that hearing. And so we're fighting our own bureaucracy out there.
Wow, this is such an education. Let's go back to our social media desk for some updates with our very own Tim McGinnis. Tim?
Thanks a lot, Armstrong. Yeah, we have a lot of stuff coming in. If you want to find us on Facebook and make a comment or ask a question, we're at News Channel 15 on Facebook. We're at Carolina Live on Twitter. I want to share with you 2 things that came into our Facebook page. One of them is I want to comment on what Armstrong said about dating and seeing signs. There were no signs for me. We dated. He was Prince Charming. Then we married. Day after we married, he said, come sit next to me, your owner. It went downhill from there. I actually know this person. Here's another one that came into us. She says, I'm proud to say I know Chief Rhodes, and she personally helped me in a horrific situation. I got out, and we in this county are truly blessed to have her as chief, and I thank all of you for bringing this to TV. Most important thing I think she says is no one should ever be hurt by someone they love. It is never okay. Again, News Channel 15 on Twitter at Carolina, or News Channel 15 on Facebook at Carolina Live on Twitter. Armstrong.
Thank you, Tim. You know, Chief Rose, another issue. How do you help yourself in law enforcement and the victim? How do you get women to understand that when you go to their home, once you're called, that they defeat the purpose when they become the biggest defender of the person they called you on? How do you change the psychosis of that?
It begins with educating our officers. We want our officers to understand why these women feel the need to defend men. As Laura said, it is one of the most dangerous situations for us because quite often we go to arrest the perpetrator and we end up having to defend ourselves against the victim. Right. But we need to understand why. It's not as if that victim just all of a sudden said, I want to hate the police. They know if they don't put forth some type of effort in defending this man, the beating is going to be worse when he gets home. He's going to get out of jail eventually. You can't keep him there forever. What? So it truly does begin with educating our officers. It is so easy for an officer to respond to the exact same house every other weekend that they're working. You know that you know the male half is drinking, and when he gets his fill, he's going to start beating her. And you're a police officer, and you have responded there for 3 years in a row. Every Saturday night, this guy gets arrested, you put him in jail, or he leaves before you get there. You have to go get warrants for him. It is so easy to become cynical because you say, well, why should I care if she doesn't care? The reality is you have to care for her. You have to care for her until you can make her want to remove herself from that situation. And so we are moving and educating law enforcement because, and when she asked still about the judges, the reality is that there are still a lot of people out there who still think that it's a family issue. Right. It's a family problem.
I don't need to interfere.
Yeah, I don't need to interfere. And we've got to change that perspective, and we have to change it in law enforcement, to be perfectly honest with you. So we have to educate our officers.
You know, this sounds more like a disease. Really?
I also would add to that, it seems like this shouldn't be a woman's issue, that we need to hear more men, and that's what's great about having you do this, and the men here who have spoken. You need more men to stand up and say this isn't okay. You need brothers and friends and people to stand, men to come forward. It shouldn't be a woman's issue. No.
I agree, and I mentioned earlier to you, Armstrong, that people know what's going on inside households. People know, neighbors know what's going on. We as a people have got to get back that sense of community that we've lost, where we take care of each other. Because honestly, neighbors need to reach out. When he leaves and go to work, somebody needs to go over and talk with that victim. But at the same time, following up on what Nina said, if you are the neighbor and you know he's beating his wife and she's not calling the police, why don't you go over as the male half and talk with him and see if you can't get him to get some kind of counseling?
Well, why would not this be just as more of a deadly situation for the neighbor than it would be for a police officer? And maybe they say, you know what, that's none of my business. People have gotten to the point now where they don't want to get sued, they don't want to be in the line of fire, and they don't want to get between no man and his woman. That's a dangerous situation. And so why should they put themselves in harm's way knowing that is a threatening situation? Tell us why.
Well, I'm not encouraging them to go and get involved in the middle of an argument. But they should call the police for that.
Listen, if she talks to him and he finds out about it, he could whip her for that. And may have it out for the neighbor.
100%. I'm saying, though, when he's not around, go and give her the 1-800 number. Go and slide that to her. Go and just let her know, look, I know the situation that you're in. It could just be passing her in the grocery store. I have a place that you can go and stay if you really need to get away from them. Just offer the assistance. Just offer that assistance. And going back to with the brothers speaking up and the uncles speaking up and the other men speaking up, they need to address it with men. And I know what you're saying, why get involved? Get involved because it's the right thing to do. Right. That's what it boils down to. It's the right thing to do.
That's true. You know, courage is in short supply these days. unfortunately.
Yes.
It takes a lot of courage to go into a situation like
Well,
that.
then call law enforcement and we'll do it for
You know what? You know what? But
You
the
have the
problem is,
courage.
the problem is sometimes if the neighbor does step in, sometimes you can save that person's life because sometimes
Yes.
law enforcement cannot get there in time. You know, I want to come back to the men part. You know, are these men ever remorseful? Do they feel bad about what they do? Do they hurt inside? Do they want somebody to stop them?
They always are in court. But like I said, a man that's capable of doing that will do whatever is necessary to show remorse, but I promise you he's capable of doing it again. And that's just my experience as a prosecutor. Armstrong, I want to take this opportunity to plug something, and it's important. If you're out there listening to this broadcast, if you're in the audience, I want you to write this down or type it in your cell phone, October the 7th. I have right here the book from last year. It's the Silent Witness Ceremony. This will be the 17th time we've done this, where we remember men and women who lost their lives in a domestic violence murder from the previous year. Last year, for the 2012 year, in this past October, 39 women were murdered by their domestic partner and 9 men. 48 lives lost. And we had 48 silhouettes, blue and red, out on the steps of the Capitol. We had a 49th silhouette that's purple, representing all those who were unknown. And I want you to come out to Columbia, to the State House steps. There will be numerous nonprofit victims advocacy groups, law enforcement groups. Our office will be there. Sadly, we're going to remember and recognize the families of those people who lost their lives this year. But it's the Silent Witness Ceremony on October the 7th. We want you to come out. Come with buses, because if you don't come, it's like a stick falling in the woods. No one's there to hear it. So I want to promote this because it brings awareness to this very serious issue, and I wanted your viewers to hear that.
You know, the telephone number is at the lower third. Look at it on the screen. Where are the parents of these men that are abusing? Do they cover for them? Because it seems like if anybody could have influence on them to stop this and to recognize what they're doing to their grandchildren, it's the parents.
They may have modeled it. You know, those parents may have modeled that behavior, and that's one of those cyclical things that we deal with, that, you know, if you learn that at home, you know, the daughter say, well, you know, that's a form of love, so I'm going to marry somebody that's going to beat me. You know, she's attracted to that. And the young man who may see that in the home may grow up and become an abuser. And I applaud you for not doing that. You had that choice of not going down that road, but you saw that modeled in your life. And we have to reach out to everyone about that's not acceptable behavior. One of the things that we're trying to do in our state is have, you know, a dating type of education in our lower grades, starting early. This is not the way men and women are supposed to treat one another, and we have to teach that to our young people, especially those that are being taught at home the opposite. And to a young lady, if you start dating someone who is trying to control you, you know, now, you know, my daddy used to tell me, whoever you date, that's the best he's going to be. He's on his best behavior. Mm-hmm. So if it's not good now, it's going to get worse.
Excellent.
I have a question for the panel. Let's say
before you ask that, because that's an important question, I know, let's go to Tim McGinnis so he can update us on social media, and we'll come right back to you. Tim?
Sorry, Nina, we'll be right back with you. If you want to ask a question or make a comment, you can find us on Facebook. We're News Channel 15 on Facebook, at Carolina Live on Twitter, and on Twitter, where we heard from Mary Barron, whose name I can say now, who said that she was in an abusive relationship for 11.5 years and was hit in the head with a gun, says she's no longer in the relationship. She says, I'm a survivor, thank God. I wanted to reach out to victims like me. I have a story to tell. So we want to thank her for reaching out to us. Also want to pass on this from Roshonda. She says, what can we do to stop the generational cycle of domestic violence, which is something I think we've been talking about, how it is generational. So how do we stop it? Armstrong?
Thank you, Tim. Nina, as promised.
You're an abuser with a conscience, and you hate yourself after you've, you know, had all that beer and you've beaten up your wife, and you're watching this show. What should you do?
If you're an abuser with a conscience.
If you're an abuser with a conscience and you really want to change.
If you're so self-aware to recognize that problem, kudos to you for that. You need to go see it. You need to get into a batterer treatment program. Right. You need to seek help, because there's nothing normal about hitting someone. There's nothing normal about it. And if you're so self-aware to recognize that, then you need to go seek professional help. There are battery treatment programs out there, and we can provide those to you. If you want to call our office and ask it, if you call Chief Rhodes' office, I know that they'll put you in touch with a battery treatment program. But there are anger management programs and battery treatment programs out there for those type of people.
Yes.
You know, I want to go back to Bishop Goins. You've been listening to this, and nobody's really standing up and talking about the men, and it seems like you're the best example. People keep referring to you. So let us come back to you. Some thoughts on what men and how we can save men from this disease.
Well, we can save men by making them accountable in our church, and we have a no tolerance policy when it comes to domestic violence. Wasn't always like that, but we've had to adapt that policy of some things that we just don't tolerate. And domestic violence is one of the ones that we don't tolerate. We tell the women and the men in counsel that, look, we're going to advise the woman to leave you if you are beating her, abusing her in that way. Our strong advice is to leave. But we men make other men accountable.
Right.
Men need to be made accountable by other men.
You know, I didn't realize, I didn't even see them in the line. I thought they were getting up, go to the bathroom. Gentlemen, my apologies.
And whoever the preacher was that made that idiotic, ludicrous statement that told the woman to stay, he needed to be sued for malpractice.
Sorry, guys. Yes, go ahead. State your name.
Fonzie Lewis. I'm a local convenience store owner, and I have people all the time running into my store. The neighborhood, they're fighting, and they're coming there for help because there's lights on.
Yeah.
And if we get involved, then we're the bad person. And then when the law gets there, they're the bad person. What are we supposed to do as a community? If you jump in, you're the one that's in the wrong. And one other part, I'd like to say, I hadn't heard anything about men being abused. We have women that's abusing men out there too. We see it quite often in our business. So let's talk both sides of it. Mr. Allen did speak, I believe he said 9 people were killed last year. 9 men?
9 men.
So there's 2 sides to it.
Yes, sir.
There is.
Thank you.
We do. I want to clarify, when you say when you get involved, you're the bad guy, and when the law gets there, explain that to me, because I'd like to answer your question.
You're
I
the
just
bad
don't
guy
understand
with
it.
the couple. The couple comes, the wife may run in or the husband may run in, and then the other one comes in behind them. And here you are in the middle trying to separate them in your business, and then you get the law, you call the law. So you're the bad guy. You got the law involved. So they come there for safety, but they put you in the middle.
And please understand and be aware that criminal domestic violence situations are very dangerous situations. And so what I will say is continue to call for the police to come. Whether you are regarded as the bad guy or not, still do the right thing and do everything you can to protect her. That's the one thing that I can tell you. I don't know how else to say or what else to say other than please call the police to protect her.
We have someone here whose daughter was killed as a result of domestic violence. We want to hear your story. Thank you for your patience. Go ahead.
Sure. My name is Linda Snelling, and my daughter was a domestic violence murder victim. She was murdered November 21st, 1995. Her boyfriend took a double-edged serrated knife with a brass knuckle grip and stabbed her 35 times and then tortured her as she died. And that's the short of it. I have been a domestic violence victims advocate ever since. I founded a nonprofit corporation called Not One More Incorporated. Under that, we have the Horry Georgetown County Silent Witness Project, which are memorials to women, men, and children who have been murdered in Horry County as a result of domestic violence. And we started a 3rd program called Help the Girls, which is an international program to help women around the world. I'd like to start with saying this is not a women's issue. This is not a men's issue. This is a human rights issue. As a human being, we have the right to not be beaten. As a human being, we have the right to law enforcement. We have the right to help, to shelters. And I know we've been talking about our courts and how they're letting victims down. And I'd like to address that issue because for the last year, every Tuesday, I've been in family court for order of protection hearings. Now, I've seen some really good ones. But boy, have I seen a lot of really bad ones.
Let's give them a chance to respond to you. Mr. Attorney General, you wanted to say something?
Well, no, Mr. Lewis, I was just going to tell you, if I have to hold a news conference standing beside you to say you're not a bad guy for reporting something like that, I'll come down here and do that. No one's. Listen, people like you, when you speak out, we use folks like you in a court to prosecute these thugs. And so there's nothing bad about that. Nothing bad about calling a spade a spade. You know, if someone, you see an act of violence, you report that. I commend you if you can do that. Do that every time. I just want to tell you that thank you for what you do, and if there's any way we can advertise or promote these nonprofits that you've created through our office, I want to be able to do that. Again, there's so many of these groups out there, I don't even know all of them. And so if we need to find a better way to promote your efforts out there. And so you let us, I'll see you after this, and I'll get your information, and we'll find a way to promote that. But the resources are there. We just have to get it to the people who need it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir. You know, quickly, about 30 seconds, please. You know what we're going to do? Here's what we're going to do. We're just going to continue this online because, you know, I don't know why it is. People just wait until the last minute when we're about to run out of time. Everybody has a question. No, we're going to come to you. But it's just human. It's human nature. It's what happens. But we appreciate it because we're going to get to all your questions. Stay there. No, we're going to continue. Stay. Don't go anywhere. Look, we should give this panel a round of applause. You're welcome. And we should give Tim McGinnis a round of applause. You, Mr. Attorney General, Laura, Chief Rose, Nina, I mean, the substance, the depth of this issue, I mean, it's just been riveting. Even for someone like me who's in media, I mean, there's so much more that we can do in print and in television to highlight this, to support what you're doing. Because people are dying for no reason. And you're right. It is a human right. You have the right not to be violently killed by some lunatic. Thank you for joining us. And that's right, some craze. They will change it. We'll make a difference. Thank you all.